That old woman still thinks baking cookies is a real career. My former daughter-in-law laughed during a live stream while her friends sipped wine behind her, and my own son lowered his eyes instead of defending me. I didn't say a word. I simply picked up my coat, walked out of the backyard party, and drove home alone through the rain. 6 months later, the same woman nearly dropped her champagne glass when she saw me smiling back at her from a television screen in Times Square. I never imagined that humiliation could feel so quiet. People think heartbreak arrives loudly, with screaming and slammed doors, but in my experience, the worst kind arrives softly, hidden inside little moments no one else notices. A glance, a laugh, someone changing the subject when you speak, someone treating you like a guest in your own family. That evening had started like dozens of others before it. Ryan had invited me over for what he called a small family barbecue at his beautiful house outside Columbus. The backyard looked like something from a magazine. White string lights hung above the patio. A stone fire pit glowed softly beside the pool. Linda had arranged tiny flower centerpieces on every table, as if she were hosting a corporate event instead of a family dinner. I remember standing in my kitchen before leaving home, tying the ribbon around the pie box with extra care. Apple cinnamon, Ryan's favorite since he was 8 years old. I even wore the pale blue cardigan he once bought me for Mother's Day years ago, back when he still looked at me like I mattered. "Mom, don't overdo it," he used to say whenever I baked too much food. Back then, his voice carried warmth. Lately, it sounded more like obligation. The moment I arrived at the party, I felt it again. That invisible distance. Linda kissed the air beside my cheek without touching me. "You made pie?" she asked with a tight smile. "That's sweet." Sweet. Not thoughtful. Not wonderful. Just sweet. Her friends barely looked at me. Most of them were younger women in expensive summer dresses holding tall glasses of sparkling wine. They talked about brand deals, vacation homes, and private schools while I sat quietly near the edge of the patio folding napkins no one asked me to fold. I've learned something about getting older. People stop seeing you as a person and start seeing you as background noise. The live stream started sometime after sunset. Linda loved social media. She documented everything. The appetizers, the decorations, the cocktails, even Ryan standing by the grill, smiling like a politician during election season. I tried staying out of the camera's view, but while carrying dishes back into the kitchen, I accidentally crossed behind her phone. Linda turned, laughed, and said the sentence I still hear some nights when the house gets too quiet. "That's my ex-mother-in-law, Evelyn. She still thinks baking cookies is a career." Everyone laughed. Not loudly, just enough. The kind of laughter people use when they don't want to seem cruel, even though they know exactly what they're doing. My face burned. Ryan glanced toward me for 1 second, then looked back down at the grill. He said nothing. That hurt more than Linda's comment ever could. I placed the empty tray beside the sink carefully because my hands had started shaking. Then I picked up my purse, walked through the side gate, and left without saying goodbye. Rain tapped softly against my windshield during the drive home. The windshield wipers moved back and forth like a metronome, counting every quiet humiliation I had swallowed over the years. When I finally reached my small townhouse, I carried the untouched pie inside and set it on the kitchen counter. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. I stood there for a long time staring at that pie box before slowly removing my cardigan and folding it over the chair. Then I sat alone at the kitchen table in the dark, wondering when exactly my own family had stopped being proud of me. The next morning, I woke up with the same heaviness sitting in my chest that had followed me home from Ryan's party. For a few seconds, I stayed still beneath the blankets, listening to the soft ticking of the kitchen clock downstairs. Morning light slipped through the thin curtains in pale gray stripes across the bedroom wall. Rainwater still clung to the windows from the night before. At 68 years old, I had learned that humiliation does not disappear after sleep. It settles into the body quietly, in your shoulders, in your stomach, in the silence of your home. I made coffee the same way I always did. 2 scoops of grounds, a splash of vanilla creamer, 1 cracked blue mug that had survived 3 different houses and nearly 40 years of family dinners. The pie still sat untouched on the counter exactly where I left it. The ribbon around the box looked ridiculous now. Too careful, too hopeful. I threw it away before pouring my coffee. Outside, my neighborhood looked ordinary. A man walked his golden retriever past the mailbox. Someone down the street started a lawn mower. Across from my townhouse, Mrs. Harper watered her flower beds wearing oversized gardening gloves and fuzzy slippers even though it was almost 80 degrees outside. Normal life kept moving. That was always the strange part about heartbreak. The world never pauses for it. Around noon, my phone buzzed with a message from Ryan. "Sorry you left early last night." Linda was joking. "Do not take it personally." I stared at the screen for a long time before setting the phone face down on the kitchen table. He did not ask if I was hurt. He did not say what she did was wrong. He only wanted the discomfort to disappear as quickly as possible. That had become Ryan's specialty over the years. Avoiding tension instead of confronting it. When he was little, he used to run straight toward problems. I still remember the day he stood up to a fifth-grade bully for another boy at school. His lip was trembling afterward, but he looked proud of himself. "Nobody should be treated like that," he told me back then. Somewhere along the way, that boy disappeared. The rest of the afternoon passed quietly. I cleaned the kitchen twice, even though it was already spotless. Folded laundry that did not need folding. Rearranged spice jars alphabetically. Small tasks made the silence feel less sharp. Around 4 o'clock, I opened the freezer and found the last batch of sugar cookies I had baked for the church shelter downtown. Every Thursday, I brought desserts there for families who needed a warm meal. I had been doing it for almost 3 years now. Nobody online knew about it. Nobody in my family cared enough to ask where I spent my Thursdays. I placed the cookies into plastic containers carefully, tying each one with simple red ribbon. Habit. Presentation mattered to me even if nobody noticed anymore. The church sat 20 minutes away near the older side of Columbus, where brick buildings leaned slightly with age and corner stores still had handwritten signs taped to the windows. The shelter kitchen smelled like tomato soup and bleach when I arrived. Volunteers moved between folding tables carrying trays of cornbread and paper cups of coffee. Miss Evelyn, one of the younger volunteers, called when she saw me. "You brought cookies again." I smiled softly and handed her the containers. Her name was Tessa. 23 years old, freckles across her cheeks, always wearing oversized sweatshirts with paint stains on the sleeves. "People ask about your desserts every week," she said. "One man called your peach cobbler life-changing." I laughed quietly for the first time all day. "Well, that might be a little dramatic." "No," she said seriously. "You make people feel cared for." I looked down at the cookie containers in my hands, then back toward the crowded dining room where exhausted mothers sat beside children balancing paper plates on their laps. Nobody there knew I had spent the previous evening being laughed at by my own family. Nobody there cared whether baking counted as a real career. For the first time in months, I felt something small loosen inside my chest. Not happiness exactly, just relief. The kind that comes when you enter a room where nobody expects you to prove your worth. Over the next few weeks, Thursdays slowly became the only part of my routine that still felt warm. Everything else in my life seemed to carry a quiet tension beneath it, like a floorboard ready to crack if too much weight landed in the wrong place. Ryan called occasionally, but our conversations had become strangely careful. He talked about mortgage rates, work deadlines, traffic on Interstate 71. Surface things. Safe things. Neither of us mentioned Linda's livestream. Again, silence had always been easier for him than honesty. At the shelter, though, nobody treated me like background decoration. People looked directly at me when they spoke. They thanked me for recipes, asked questions about cinnamon and pie crusts, and how long peach cobbler should cool before serving. Tiny conversations, tiny kindnesses. They mattered more than I liked admitting. One Thursday evening, Tessa found me wrapping banana bread in parchment paper near the kitchen counter. "You should really let me post these online," she said while stacking canned soup into boxes nearby. "People would lose their minds over your baking." I laughed softly without looking up. Trust me, nobody is interested in watching an old woman bake cookies. The second the words left my mouth, I regretted them. They sounded too familiar, too close to Linda's voice. Tessa stopped what she was doing and frowned at me. "That is not true at all." I shrugged lightly and kept folding paper around the bread. "The internet is for young people dancing in kitchens and filming vacations." "No," she said firmly. "The internet is for whatever makes people feel something." I did not answer because I was not sure what to say to that. A few minutes later, while I arranged desserts onto trays, I noticed Tessa holding her phone up toward the counter. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Nothing weird," she said quickly with a grin. "I am filming your hands while you work." That is all. My hands. People love baking videos. especially comforting ones. I almost told her to stop, but something about the moment felt harmless. The kitchen lights glowed softly against the stainless steel counters. Steam drifted from giant pots of soup near the stove. Outside the small windows above the sink, evening rain blurred the parking lot into watercolor streaks. For the first time in a long while, I did not feel embarrassed being seen, so I let her film. She captured small things. My fingers sprinkling flour across the counter. The careful way I pressed lattice dough over apple filling. The old recipe card stained with vanilla and butter marks from years of use. At one point, she asked quietly, "How long have you been baking?" I smiled faintly without looking up from the pie crust. Long enough to know people need comfort more than perfection. She posted the video that night without telling me. I only found out 3 days later when my phone would not stop vibrating during breakfast. I thought something terrible had happened. There were missed calls from unknown numbers, text messages from women I had not spoken to in years, even a voicemail from my cousin in Arizona asking why I was all over the internet. Confused, I opened the message Tessa had sent around midnight. "Please do not be mad at me." Beneath it was a link. I clicked it slowly. The video opened with soft piano music playing behind clips of my hands kneading dough beneath warm kitchen lights. The camera lingered on the steam rising from peach cobbler and trays of cookies stacked beside handwritten recipe cards. Then my voice appeared quietly over the footage saying the sentence I barely remembered speaking. People need comfort more than perfection. Nearly 4 million people had watched it. I stared at the screen while my coffee turned cold beside me. Comments flooded beneath the video faster than I could read them. "She reminds me of my grandmother. I would buy every pie she makes. This woman feels like home." One comment stopped me completely. "You can tell she has spent her whole life making people feel loved while nobody bothered to notice her." I sat there silently at my kitchen table reading that sentence over and over again while morning sunlight spread slowly across the floorboards. Somewhere deep inside me, something long forgotten stirred awake. By the following week, the video had spread far beyond Columbus. I noticed it first in small ways. Strangers smiling at me in the grocery store. A cashier at Target staring twice before saying, "Wait, are you the baking lady from TikTok?" Even the mailman lingered longer than usual near my porch one afternoon just to ask whether I really made everything from scratch. The attention felt surreal. I had spent so many years becoming invisible that recognition almost felt uncomfortable. Every morning, I woke up expecting the excitement to disappear. Overnight, instead, it kept growing. Tessa called me constantly with updates I barely understood. 8 million views now, she said one afternoon while I stood in my kitchen peeling apples. "A celebrity chef reposted your video." I laughed nervously. "I think people are just bored online." "No, Evelyn," she replied gently. "People are hungry for kindness." That sentence stayed with me longer than I expected. Hungry for kindness. Maybe she was right. The world felt louder these days. Faster. Meaner. Everyone shouting opinions at each other through screens. Maybe watching an older woman quietly bake pies reminded people of something softer they missed. 3 days later, another video appeared online without my permission. This time it came from someone at the shelter filming me teaching 2 little girls how to braid pie crust edges with flour-covered fingers. The comments exploded even faster than before. "Protect this woman at all costs. She deserves her own cooking show. This feels like watching my grandmother again." I should have felt happy. Instead, I mostly felt confused. For years, Linda had made me feel old-fashioned and embarrassing for loving things like handwritten recipes and homemade bread. Ryan used to joke about my flip phone at family dinners while Linda laughed beside him. "Mom still lives in 1998, he would tease. Everyone always laughed, including me sometimes. It felt easier than admitting those jokes stung. But now strangers online treated those same parts of me like treasures instead of flaws. One Thursday evening, while cleaning flour off the counter at the shelter kitchen, Tessa suddenly froze while staring at her phone. "Oh no," she whispered. "What?" I asked quietly. She looked uncomfortable for the first time since all this started. "Somebody found Linda's live stream." My stomach tightened immediately. What live stream? But deep down, I already knew. Tessa turned the phone toward me slowly. There it was. The backyard party. The string lights. The wine glasses. My pale blue cardigan crossing briefly behind the camera. Then Linda's voice laughing carelessly into the microphone. "That is my ex-mother-in-law, Evelyn. She still thinks baking cookies is a career. Hearing it again felt different now. Colder somehow. Crueler. Maybe because I could finally see my own face afterward. The small, embarrassed smile. The way I lowered my eyes. The way Ryan avoided looking at me. Thousands of comments flooded beneath the reposted clip. This woman mocked her. That older lady seems sweeter than everyone at that party. Imagine humiliating your own family member for baking. The son should have defended his mother. I handed the phone back quietly. My chest felt strangely calm. Not triumphant. Just clear. For years, I thought maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe Linda's comments were harmless jokes I failed to understand. But strangers saw the cruelty immediately. That realization changed something inside me. Later that night, my phone rang while I folded dish towels at home. Ryan's name appeared on the screen. I stared at it for several seconds before answering. His voice sounded tense. "Mom, have you been online today?" A little. Silence stretched between us. I could hear him exhale softly. People are attacking Linda. I sat down slowly at the kitchen table. I did not ask anyone to do that. I know. Another pause. She is really upset. The old version of me would have apologized immediately just to make things easier. But I was tired of carrying responsibility for other people's behavior. "Ryan," I said quietly, "Linda is upset because people finally heard what she actually said." He did not answer right away. Somewhere faintly in the background, I heard Linda speaking sharply from another room. Then Ryan lowered his voice almost to a whisper. "Mom, there is something else. A television producer reached out asking for your contact information." I looked down at the flour still dusting my fingertips beneath the kitchen light and felt my heartbeat slow, steady, and unfamiliar. For the first time in years, my life no longer felt small. The television producer called me the following morning while I was standing in the baking aisle at Kroger comparing prices on vanilla extract. At first, I thought it was another scam call. The woman introduced herself as Melissa Grant from a national morning program. Based in New York, her voice sounded polished but warm, the kind of voice that made every sentence feel important. "Ms. Carter," she said, "our audience connected deeply with your story. We would love to fly you to Manhattan for an interview next week." I nearly dropped the bottle in my hand. For several seconds, I simply stared at the rows of flour stacked on metal shelves while shoppers pushed carts around me, like normal life had not suddenly tilted sideways. "I think you may have the wrong person," I said quietly. Melissa laughed softly. "Trust me, we absolutely do not." By the time I reached the parking lot, my hands were trembling so badly I had to sit inside my car for 5 minutes before driving home. New York. Television. Interview. The words felt unreal together. My entire life had been ordinary in the most invisible way possible. I raised a son, paid bills, packed school lunches, attended church on Sundays, and baked pies for neighbors after funerals. Women like me did not end up on national television. Women like me usually disappeared quietly into the background, while louder people took up all the space in the room. But over the next few days, everything moved quickly. Melissa's team booked my flight, reserved a hotel near Times Square, and even sent a stylist to help choose wardrobe options for the interview. I almost canceled 3 separate times. Every insecurity I had swallowed over the years rose to the surface at once. Linda's voice echoed constantly in the back of my mind. Old-fashioned, embarrassing, irrelevant, too old, too boring, too small. The night before my flight, I stood alone in my bedroom staring at the open suitcase on the bed. My pale blue cardigan hung carefully beside the closet door. For a moment, I considered leaving it behind. Then I folded it gently into the suitcase anyway. At John Glenn International Airport the next morning, I felt completely out of place among business travelers rolling expensive luggage across polished floors. Tessa insisted on driving me there herself. "You belong in every room they put you in," she told me before I boarded. "Do not let anybody convince you otherwise." I carried those words with me the entire flight. Manhattan overwhelmed me immediately. The noise, the traffic, the endless walls of glowing billboards towering above crowded sidewalks. From the car window, I watched people hurry through crosswalks holding coffee cups and briefcases while steam drifted from vents beneath the streets. Everything moved fast. Too fast. My hotel room sat 20 floors above the city with giant windows overlooking Times Square. That night, I barely slept. The next morning, makeup artists curled my silver hair while producers clipped microphones onto my sweater. Everyone spoke quickly around me using television terms I did not understand. Segment timing, camera rehearsal, lighting adjustment. I felt like an accidental guest wandering into somebody else's world. Then one of the younger assistants looked at me while adjusting papers in her hands and said quietly, "My grandmother passed away last year." Watching your videos felt like hearing her voice again. Something inside me settled after that. The studio lights no longer seemed frightening. The cameras stopped feeling like threats. Suddenly, this was no longer about becoming famous. It was about being seen. Really seen. A few minutes before filming began, I checked my phone backstage. There were 3 missed calls from Ryan and 2 messages from Linda. The first one read, "We should probably talk before your interview." The second arrived 20 minutes later. "Please do not mention the live stream on television." I stared at the screen for a long moment before locking the phone and placing it face down beside me. Then a production assistant opened the dressing room door and smiled warmly. "They are ready for you now, Miss Carter." I stood slowly, smoothed the front of my cardigan with trembling fingers, and walked toward the bright studio lights waiting beyond the hallway. The studio felt colder than I expected beneath the bright overhead lights. People moved quickly around me holding clipboards and coffee cups while giant cameras rolled silently across the polished floor. Somewhere nearby, an audience laughed at a joke from the previous segment, but everything around me sounded strangely distant, as if I were underwater. A makeup artist brushed powder lightly across my cheeks one final time before stepping away. "You are going to do great," she whispered kindly. I smiled politely, even though my stomach felt tight enough to snap. Then the host walked over to greet me. Her name was Vanessa Reed, a woman with calm eyes and the kind of confidence that made everybody around her relax immediately. She shook my hand warmly and said, "My entire staff fell in love with your videos." I almost laughed from nervousness. "I still do not understand why." "Because you remind people of someone who made them feel safe," she answered simply. That sentence followed me onto the stage. The audience applauded softly as I walked toward the interview chair beneath the warm studio lights. I could barely see individual faces beyond the cameras, only shapes and movement and flashes of color. Vanessa began gently, asking about my childhood in Ohio, about learning recipes from my mother, about baking for church dinners after my husband passed away years earlier. At first, my voice trembled slightly. I kept twisting the edge of my cardigan sleeve beneath the table without realizing it. But the longer we talked, the easier it became. Something strange happens when people truly listen to you after years of being ignored. Your voice remembers itself. I told stories about burning my first cherry pie at age 14 and about Ryan licking brownie batter from mixing bowls when he was little. The audience laughed softly at that one. For a moment, I almost forgot about cameras entirely. Then Vanessa asked the question I knew was coming. "A lot of people online were heartbroken watching the video from that family gathering," she said carefully. "Did you realize at the time how painful those comments were?" The studio became very quiet. I looked down briefly at my folded hands before answering. "I think when people are treated a certain way long enough, they start convincing themselves it is normal." Vanessa nodded gently, but did not interrupt. "Sometimes," I continued softly, "the hardest part is not the cruelty itself. It is watching people you love stay silent while it happens." Somewhere in the audience, I heard someone inhale sharply. I did not mention Linda's name. I did not attack anyone. I simply told the truth. That truth felt heavier than anger ever could. After the interview ended, several audience members approached me backstage with tears in their eyes. One woman around my age held both my hands tightly and whispered, "Thank you for saying what so many mothers feel." Another younger woman hugged me briefly before hurrying away to catch her train. I stood there overwhelmed by the realization that my loneliness had not been unique at all. So many people carried quiet heartbreak inside ordinary lives. Later that evening, the network arranged for my interview to play on a giant digital billboard overlooking Times Square as part of a promotional segment. Melissa insisted I should see it in person. So around sunset, bundled inside my pale blue cardigan against the cool evening air, I stood on a crowded Manhattan sidewalk surrounded by tourists and flashing lights while my own face suddenly appeared 30 feet high above the city. The crowd nearby paused to watch. Some people recognized me immediately from social media and pointed excitedly. I covered my mouth with one hand in disbelief. The enormous screen showed me smiling softly beneath the studio lights, while Vanessa's voice echoed from outdoor speakers overhead. Millions of Americans have connected with Evelyn Carter's story of resilience, kindness, and rediscovering self-worth later in life. My eyes filled unexpectedly with tears, not because I felt famous, not because strangers recognized me, but because for the first time in years, I no longer felt ashamed of who I was. My phone buzzed repeatedly inside my coat pocket. Messages, missed calls, notifications flooding endlessly. I ignored all of them until one text preview appeared across the screen from Linda herself. "I just saw you on television in Times Square." I stared at the message while neon lights reflected across the wet pavement beneath my shoes. Then slowly, for the first time in a very long time, I smiled without sadness attached to it. By the time I returned to Ohio 2 days later, my quiet little townhouse no longer felt invisible to the world. Flower arrangements crowded my front porch from people I had never met. A local bakery downtown sent over fresh croissants with a handwritten note thanking me for reminding America what kindness looks like. Even the cashier at the gas station near my neighborhood asked for a selfie while I paid for coffee. The attention still startled me every time. I kept expecting someone to realize they had mistaken me for somebody more important. But the strangest part was not the strangers. It was my family. Ryan called 3 times during my flight home, then twice more before I even unpacked my suitcase. When I finally answered, his voice sounded unusually careful. "Mom," he said softly, "I saw the interview." I placed folded sweaters into my dresser drawer while balancing the phone between my shoulder and ear. "I figured you probably did." Silence lingered briefly. Then he cleared his throat. "You were really good." The compliment landed awkwardly between us, almost unfamiliar. Ryan had not praised me sincerely in years. "Thank you," I replied quietly. "Linda watched it too," he added. Of course she did. I imagined her sitting on the white sectional sofa in their spotless living room scrolling through comments she could no longer control. For years, she had carefully shaped every image people saw online. Perfect parties, perfect vacations, perfect marriage. But now millions of strangers had watched a different version of her entirely, one she never intended to show. "She feels terrible," Ryan continued. I sat down slowly at the edge of my bed. "Does she?" Another pause. "Mom, I think maybe things just got out of hand." I looked toward the bedroom window where afternoon sunlight stretched across the neighboring rooftops. Out of hand. Such a gentle phrase for years of humiliation. "Ryan," I said calmly, "things do not accidentally become patterns." He grew quiet after that. The old version of me would have rushed to comfort him, to soften the conversation, to make sure nobody felt too guilty. But I had spent decades protecting everyone else's emotions while ignoring my own. I could not keep doing that anymore. 2 evenings later, there was a knock. At my front door just after sunset. Through the window, I saw Ryan standing alone on the porch with his hands shoved into his coat pockets. He looked older than I remembered, tired around the eyes. I opened the door slowly. "Hi, Mom." "Hi, Ryan." For a moment, neither of us moved. Then I stepped aside quietly and let him in. He walked through the townhouse looking strangely uncomfortable, as if he had forgotten the layout despite visiting dozens of times over the years. His gaze landed briefly on the growing stack of letters beside the kitchen counter. Network invitations, magazine requests, partnership offers from cooking brands I had never even heard of before. "Wow," he murmured softly. Things really changed fast. I poured coffee for both of us while he sat at the kitchen table. The same table where I had once helped him with spelling homework and science projects late into the night. The same table where I sat alone reading comments from strangers who somehow understood me better than my own family had. "Mom," Ryan finally said carefully, "Linda wants to apologize." I stirred cream slowly into my coffee without answering right away. "Does she want to apologize?" I asked quietly. "Or does she want this situation to disappear?" Ryan lowered his eyes immediately. That answer told me enough. He rubbed both hands together nervously before speaking again. "People online are being brutal. Some companies she works with pause sponsorships. Her clients keep bringing up the video." I listened silently, not because I enjoyed hearing it, but because for the first time Ryan was describing consequences instead of excuses. That mattered. "I never wanted anyone destroyed," I said softly. "I just wanted basic kindness." Ryan looked at me then with an expression I had not seen in years. "Shame. Real shame." I should have defended you that night, he admitted quietly. The room became very still after that. Outside, wind rattled dry autumn leaves across the porch steps. I wrapped both hands around my coffee mug to steady myself, because those words touched something deep inside me. Not anger, not victory, grief. Grief for all the years it took him to finally say them. Ryan swallowed hard before continuing. Linda wants us to have dinner together this weekend. She says she wants to fix things. I looked down at the steam rising from my coffee cup and thought about the woman standing beneath Times Square lights, smiling at her own reflection without shame for the first time in years. Then I looked back at my son and answered honestly. I am not sure I am the same woman she expects to meet anymore. Saturday arrived colder than expected for early October. Gray clouds stretched low across Columbus, and wind scattered red maple leaves across my driveway while I stood in front of the bedroom mirror, deciding what version of myself I wanted to bring to dinner. For years, family gatherings had felt like performances where I carefully adjusted every word and expression to avoid tension. Smile more. Speak less. Ignore the little comments. Pretend not to notice when conversations shifted around me, like furniture being quietly rearranged. But standing there that evening smoothing the sleeves of my pale blue cardigan, I realized something important. I no longer felt desperate to be accepted inside rooms that had once made me feel small. That realization changed the way I carried myself. Ryan texted just before 6. We are looking forward to seeing you. The message sounded overly careful, like someone writing customer service responses instead of speaking to his mother. I drove to their house slowly through neighborhoods glowing with porch lights and autumn decorations. Families gathered around dinner tables visible through open curtains, while football games flickered across television screens in living rooms. Ordinary Saturday evenings. Ordinary warmth. A strange ache settled briefly in my chest. There was a time when family dinners used to feel effortless for us two. Before everyone became so careful. Before silence started replacing honesty. Linda opened the front door before I even knocked. For 1 second, genuine surprise crossed her face when she saw me standing there. Not weak. Not nervous. Just calm. Evelyn, she said quickly, stepping aside. You look wonderful. I smiled politely. Thank you. The house smelled like rosemary chicken. And expensive candles. Everything inside looked exactly as polished as always. White marble countertops. Fresh flowers near the sink. Soft jazz music drifting through hidden speakers. But beneath all that perfection sat tension thick enough to feel physically in the air. Ryan hugged me awkwardly near the dining room doorway. Linda kept adjusting silverware that did not need adjusting. Nobody seemed entirely sure how to behave around me anymore. That part almost amused me. During dinner, conversation stayed painfully safe at first. Weather, traffic, a new Italian restaurant downtown. Linda described a recent partnership opportunity with a skincare brand while Ryan nodded beside her. Every few minutes, though, I caught them both studying me carefully, waiting for something. Anger perhaps. Bitterness. Some dramatic confrontation they could point to later. Instead, I simply ate my dinner quietly and listened. Halfway through the meal, Linda finally set down her wine glass and cleared her throat softly. I owe you an apology. The room became still immediately. Even the jazz music seemed quieter somehow. I folded my napkin carefully onto my lap and looked at her without speaking. Linda inhaled slowly before continuing. What I said during that live stream was cruel. I should never have spoken about you that way. Her voice sounded practiced, but underneath it I detected real embarrassment too. Public humiliation had cracked something inside her carefully controlled image. I was careless, she added quietly. And I am sorry. For years, I imagined this moment differently. I thought apology would feel satisfying somehow. Victorious. Instead, sitting there beneath the warm dining room lights, I mostly felt tired. Tired of needing validation from people who only recognized my worth after strangers pointed it out first. Ryan looked at me hopefully from across the table. Waiting. Thank you for apologizing, I said gently. Linda blinked almost like she expected something harsher. That is it, she asked softly before catching herself. I tilted my head slightly. What exactly were you expecting? She looked down immediately. Ryan shifted uncomfortably beside her. Then Linda whispered something that surprised me. I guess I thought you would want revenge. I stared at her for a long moment before answering. Linda, do you know what the saddest part of all this was? She shook her head slowly. I spent years believing your opinion of me was the truth. Neither of them spoke after that. The silence carried more weight than shouting ever could. Outside, wind rattled tree branches softly against the windows while candlelight flickered across the dining room walls. Finally, Ryan spoke in a quiet voice I had not heard since he was young. "Mom, we really were awful to you sometimes." I looked at my son then. Really looked at him. The exhaustion around his eyes. The guilt sitting heavily in his expression. And for the first time in years, I realized something unexpected. I no longer needed them to become different people in order to feel valuable myself. Life did not magically become perfect after that dinner. Healing rarely arrives all at once. It comes quietly, in layers, through small moments that slowly stop hurting the way they used to. Over the following months, Ryan began calling more often. Not out of obligation this time, but because he genuinely wanted to talk. Sometimes he asked for recipes. Other times he simply sat on the phone listening while I described ordinary things like the first snowfall of the season or the way my neighbor's dog kept escaping through broken fence boards. We were learning each other again slowly, carefully, like people rebuilding a bridge after years of neglect. Linda changed too, though in quieter ways. She stopped performing perfection online quite so aggressively. Her social media became less polished, less desperate somehow. One afternoon, she even showed up at the shelter carrying trays of homemade lasagna for the families there. It was not perfect. The noodles were slightly overcooked and she forgot aluminum foil for the pans, but I noticed something important while watching her nervously serve food beside the other volunteers. For once, she was doing something without needing applause attached to it. Winter arrived early that year in Ohio. Snow covered rooftops by Thanksgiving, turning the neighborhood into soft white silence beneath glowing porch lights. By then, my life had transformed in ways I never could have imagined 12 months earlier. The morning show invited me back twice. A publishing company offered me a cookbook deal centered around comfort food and stories about resilience. More importantly, the shelter downtown received enough donations after my interviews to expand their kitchen program through the holidays. Every Thursday evening, families packed the dining hall so tightly volunteers sometimes ran out of folding chairs. Tessa joked that my peach cobbler had become locally famous. But the greatest change happened inside me, not around me. I no longer woke up feeling embarrassed for taking up space in the world. One snowy afternoon in December, I stood in my kitchen rolling pie dough while local news played softly from the television in the background. Outside, snowflakes drifted steadily across the backyard fences. The house smelled like cinnamon and butter. My phone buzzed against the counter with a text from Ryan. "Turn on channel 5 right now." Confused, I wiped flour from my hands and looked toward the television just as the evening anchor smiled into the camera. Tonight's community spotlight honors a woman whose kindness inspired millions across the country. Then my face appeared on the screen again. But this time, the story was different. The segment showed footage from the shelter kitchen, filled with volunteers laughing beside steaming trays of food. Children decorating cookies. Elderly women teaching teenagers family recipes. Tessa hugging me after a successful fundraiser. Because of Evelyn Carter's story, the anchor continued. Local donations helped provide more than 50,000 meals this year to families across central Ohio. I sat down slowly at the kitchen table while the report continued playing. There I was beneath warm shelter lights dusted with flour, smiling naturally without realizing cameras were nearby. Not polished, not glamorous, just present, useful, alive. Tears filled my eyes unexpectedly. Not because people finally admired me, but because my pain had become something useful instead of something hidden. A few minutes later, another text appeared from Ryan. "I am proud of you, Mom." Simple words. Words I had needed for years. I stared at the message while snow continued falling quietly outside the windows. Then my phone buzzed once more. This time it was Linda. "I saw the community segment tonight. You really changed people's lives." I smiled softly before setting the phone aside without replying immediately. The old version of me would have rushed to earn approval from both of them. But approval no longer felt like oxygen. I finally understood something at 68 years old that I wish I had known much earlier. Some people will only recognize your value after the rest of the world points it out first. But true peace begins the moment you stop waiting for permission to believe in your own worth. I stood slowly and returned to the kitchen counter where unfinished pie dough waited beneath a dusting of flour. Outside, Christmas lights glowed softly across neighboring houses while evening settled over the snowy street. The kitchen felt warm. My hands felt steady. And for the first time in a very long time, my life finally felt fully mine again.